first area, supervision and reinvestment policies. Trying to focus supervision on high-risk offenders. So what does that mean? You're going to hear some statistics on earned discharge credits on parole and probation today. I don't know if we put any of those in the handout, but I'll just give you an example. If I'm a parole agent in 2012, I have about 70 felons that I'm supervising, okay? Well, how many people have kids or supervise employees? If you imagine trying to supervise 70 children, now imagine they're 18 to 26 and they have a felony on their record, okay? Can you see why maybe it's a difficult job and why you struggle with parole agents and they struggle with you and they struggle with their job and they struggle to supervise those individuals? One of the scientific practices that we discovered was if you can bring those caseloads down closer to 40 individuals, they can do a much more intense supervision. Well, how do you get there? You either hire 100 more parole agents or you try to get the people who don't need to be supervised off the caseload. One of the ideas that came out, really looking, we didn't make this up, it's worked elsewhere, is earned discharge credits. If an individual's on parole and they're perfectly compliant for 30 days, they can earn 30 days off the back end. South Dakota has some of the longest parole periods in the country because of our suspended time. If you get a 10-year drug sentence, 9 suspended, you're going to go in for a year, probably get out in 3 to 6 months, depending on the level of felony. You're going to have 9 years of parole. Well, Joe doesn't need to testify on this, and neither do any of the others that know me. But if you followed me for 9 years, I'm willing to bet you could revoke my parole, okay? I'd be lucky to make it 3 hours. So, one of the things we discovered was the people that are most likely to get their parole revoked have it done in the first 2 years. Like 83% of parolees who get revoked and sent back to prison do it in the first 2 years. So do we really need to supervise somebody from year 2 to 9? What this does is it allows that compliant individual, it incentivizes them to do what they need to do, but it also allows them to earn their way off in half the time. That brings the caseloads down. We've already seen, this started July 1st with DOC. We've already seen the compliant people getting off earlier, and the numbers have come down from about 2,800 and some to about 2,600. So the caseloads have crept down into the 50s from 70. It's going to continue. Obviously, it slows at some point, and the mathematicians in the room can figure all that out. I let them figure all that out. Greg, do you want to talk about probation at all? You guys, they just launched theirs January 1st.
Maybe just all these evidence-based practices are really targeted at one thing: reducing recidivism. Recidivism is a huge driver of our bed space, our probation revocations, all those different things. And so, as Jim mentioned, that long tail that existed on parole, it exists on probation. Same outcomes. They're going to mess up. 18 months to 2 years, typically. I bet most probation officers would tell you all know in the first 2 months if they're going to be successful or not. And so it's really part of that, using that evidence-based practice of focusing our resources on the high-risk offenders, peeling off the ones that aren't as high risk, cutting short that tail, because we do have a very significant tail compared to other states. And really, one thing that I learned in this process that I didn't know was understanding the danger of over-supervision. If you over-supervise someone, you're going to make them worse. If you're here this morning, you heard and talk about juveniles and why it's important to segregate different levels of juvenile offenders. The same concept applies to the adult system. And so if you mix everyone together and you take those people that, you test them objectively, they show up as a lower administrative risk, but you supervise them like a medium or a high. And our probation officers told us, well, yeah, I probably do meet with some of those people more than I need to. They're more fun to meet with. They're not the hardcore person. They're someone you can actually have a conversation with. And they're easier to meet with. They're going to show up for their appointment. And So we were putting a lot more resources than we needed to into those low, medium risks and not reserving our precious resources for those high risk modes. And so this earned discharge concept really relates significantly to that. And I'll just give you the numbers, and I'll repeat them for parole because Jim didn't have them quite at the top of his tongue. I'm surprised, but
518,000 days through
518 to 51. So just, I'll take one step back again. Probation started July 1st with earned discharge credit. Parole started July 1. And that was because during this process, I was a thorn in the side probably, but we really pushed toward, if there's an area that's within the court's constitutional authority, that should be developed by the court through court rules. The statutes in a number of areas now state the Supreme Court shall establish rules on evidence-based practices, shall establish rules on earned discharge credit, but left what that looked like to the court. And, in addition to just the separation of powers and, the importance of that, philosophically, realistically, that allowed us to have that 6 months window to create buy-in from our judges, from our probation officers, from our court service officers, who all participated. All the things that you'll hear me talk about on the probation end were developed in the UJS, primarily internally, but we also brought in defense attorneys, brought in state's attorneys to help us through that process. And so as we developed those rules, it allowed us to continue to train the judges on the importance of these things and why they're going to happen. A judge, initial reaction to earned discharge credit was, well, if you're going to cut the sentence in half, I'm going to sentence them twice as long. Okay, that's not the reaction we were looking for. When this process started, there was no one more curious than our circuit court judges as to what in the world is this group talking about. And so one thing that I think we did very right was we engaged them every chance we could. I provided updates of every meeting we had that went to all our judges in the system so they knew what was going on, and more importantly, they understood what the reasoning was behind it. And so when you started talking about earned discharge credit, I could talk to a judge and say, now how you have a person that's on probation, they're doing good, they're halfway through their sentence. A lot of time your probation officer will come to you and say, yep, Jimmy's doing good, let's go ahead and cut him loose. Is that okay? And the judge will do that. Very informal process across the state. Other court service officers would say, I don't ever go to my judge and do that. My judge never grants early discharge. So it was very kind of hit and miss. Again, unified judicial system, not uniform judicial system. And so a lot of these things allowed us to shore up practices that we would say, yeah, we've been doing that. But we hadn't been doing it consistently, and we didn't really know what the ground rules were for doing it. And so earned discharge is a great example of that. So our rules started July 1 with the earned discharge credits. There's a couple people that can't get earned discharge credits. This applies to parole as well. Sex offenders, it doesn't apply to. And then on the probation side, it doesn't apply to the drug specialty court participant. And that was really intended to ensure that we didn't have a backwards clock working against the program lengths. And so those are the two that were kind of categorically denied. And then you can't get the credit if you engage in certain conduct. And we'll talk about that when we get to the sanctions grid. So parole's numbers since July, 77.4% of the people earned the credit, 518,251 days awarded, which I think that's over like 1,000 years, somewhere 1,100 maybe, something like that. Parole caseloads have dropped by 200.
That's not all for one individual.
Not for one individual, yeah. And then on probation, just the last 2 months, the CSO has until the 15th of each month to get their reports finalized and get the award credits out. 75.02% of probationers have earned the credit. 167,000 days were awarded. One thing to keep in mind, once those credits are awarded, they're never revocable. The judge can't decide, well, I'm sending you to the pen now, I'm taking that time. And there's certain ways they can do it if they really wanted to, but you can never have that credit revoked once it's been awarded. And one thing that I think is kind of important philosophically, when we engaged in the discussion and worked through that rulemaking process for earned discharge credit, the tension in the room and there were defense attorneys and there were state's attorneys and there were circuit judges and magistrate judges and administrative folks like myself. It was, do you earn that credit or do you not lose that credit? What do you have to do not to get that credit? And so there were certain things that were easy to pick out. You're arrested for a new felony that month. Probably not going to earn the credit. You're awaiting to be revoked to the penitentiary and there's an active petition filed. Well, we're going to hold awarding that credit until we see what happens with that petition. And so we built that in and we tied it directly to our sanctions and incentives grid. And so there are certain things that if you do, you have the automatic denial of the credits associated with it. Sure.
How they're going to look in South Dakota.
Hope Court, so Jim gave you the basic model. That's the Hawaii model. Jim didn't send me to Hawaii to study it, so this is really, I feel uninformed. It doesn't have its base without that visit.
Well, you didn't get the name right. We wanted to name it Dakota Opportunity Probation with Enforcement.
So now it's Honest Opportunity Probation Enforcement. We didn't want to mess up with the acronym. But there's 2 pilot locations, one rural, one urban. The rural one is in Selby, Walworth County. Judge Myron is running that court. The second court is going to be here in Minnehaha, Lincoln County with Judge Long. It hasn't started yet. The one in Walworth County started January 1st. Right out of the get-go, they have about 6 participants last I checked. For the pilot, their target is 10 participants. And that rural court is really set up, Judge Myron, he was on the work group, and his expressed frustration repeatedly was, I don't have services where I'm at. I don't have drug courts where I'm at. How am I supposed to deal with a lot of these people? What options do I have in the community? I send people to the penitentiary to get treatment. And so a Hope Court seemed like a model that might work in an urban area where you have, it's not a drug court. It doesn't have that as much intense supervision as a drug court. It's not 24/7, but it's kind of somewhere in the middle. So you have that person that every morning has to make the call and see if their color came up, then they go test. Sheriff's offices are incentivized to enforce any warrants if that person doesn't show up for the test because we're going to reimburse their transportation costs. So those hope warrants become a priority for them. And you're going to get caught and you're going to come into the court and the judge might listen to your excuse, but most likely you're going to be going to jail 48 hours probably the first time, and then it'll build up from there. Minnehaha, Lincoln County, Judge Long has said to do something very similar to this with the juveniles here, to the Glory House. I'm not sure if it's quite the same process or not, but it's going to be that randomized testing. They're working to kind of work through the details. Being a step away from it, I think it was much easier for Judge Myron to get this set up in Selby because everybody he needed to talk to, county commissioners, the sheriff, they were probably all at the local coffee cup gas station, and it just kind of went in there and did this. Judge Long and the Chief Court Service Officer here, a lot more local politics, dealing with the sheriff's office, and getting everyone on board and finding a testing provider. So they're still working through that. I would expect that court to start to be operational in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks. I know they've made a lot of headway. So who's the participants you want in that court? Ideally, it's someone that's not drug addicted, but is a drug user. Apparently that can happen. And they miss a lot of appointments, and they're just not being successful on probation. Dirty UAs here and there, they're not at the point where the CSO feels like they're going to need to revoke them tomorrow, but they're getting there. Everyone's frustrated with them, and it's just not working on standard probation. So that's the ideal person that they're looking for. Again, those are just pilot sites. We have funding for 3 years. We'll see how it works. We'll see and we've intentionally left it to the rural and the urban pilot to kind of develop, their own roadmap, see how they might be different, see what they can learn from each other. And so they've all met with Judge All from Hawaii. He's been on numerous conference calls with them as they talk about what the court should look like, how they deal with certain things. everything from, who does your phone system with these coded colors to, the real serious things like when do you decide you're just done? So I'm really excited about the hope courts. I think it might present a model that will work in a lot of our rural areas. During our workgroup discussion, there was a pretty healthy debate, I would say, discussion about, okay, we have those two urban corridors that put a lot of people in the penitentiary. Should we really just focus on those? If our goal is to reduce the numbers going to the penitentiary, do we need to worry about Walworth County and Selby, who have, when I checked, they had about 10 drug-related convictions in the fiscal year 13. So they're not a major driver when you just want to look at numbers, but they've got to have resources too. You can't just abandon those areas. And so we were really struggling for alternatives, and there's some other things that we're doing in those rural areas. But this is one that provides a chance. This is not an issue unique to South Dakota. A lot of other states are dealing with these same issues of isolated areas where you can't get a treatment provider. Probation officer might be over 100 miles away. The person they're supervising doesn't have a car. It can be very frustrating for the probation officer, and it can lead to a revocation where maybe there wouldn't have been one if they had resources available. So we're really focused on that.
I'll talk about the tribal pilots. In 2012 or 13, if you're a Native American male in prison in Sioux Falls, when it's time for parole, we're going to give you $50, your parole plan completed, and wish you good luck, and tell you to make sure that you do all the things you're supposed to do. We have a few housing options, but very few. If you need housing, there's a place we can put you near the hill, and all of your friends, relatives, anybody else that you may or may not know that's coming back in the system. If you imagine salmon swimming uphill, they're being revoked from parole and they're going back in the system. They usually don't have a great attitude, and they usually bring things like K2 and spice and cell phones and assaultive behavior with them, and that's what the evidence showed us. While we have these guys going out on parole, 47% of our parole violations are Native American, and so we have all these Native Americans going out in Sioux Falls or Rapid City. Well, they haven't lived in Sioux Falls or Rapid City. They haven't had a job in Sioux Falls or Rapid City. They don't have a car. They don't have an apartment. They don't have supportive family there. So that $50 gate money will probably get them to succeed, right? Well, the evidence showed us that they weren't succeeding, and we're not able to find a model in the country that works in this area with Native American parolees. In fact, this is so unusual, the country of Australia is now studying this to see if they can modify this to work with the indigenous folks in Australia. We don't yet know if this is going to work. It's taken us a year, approximately a year, to get the first signed agreement with the Sistan Wahpeton Oyate tribe. And the way this is going to work is the tribe and the state are under agreement, much like what do you call that, when you have a probationer or a parolee or a probationer in another state? Interstate compact. Much like an interstate compact, the parolee is going to go to Sisseton and be under supervision of a tribal parole agent. If they need treatment, if they need swift and certain sanctions, there's a grid, they have accountability, there's a state parole agent that helps supervise the situation, there's an agreement that they'll give them back to us if they need to be revoked and go to the penitentiary. We have no idea if this is going to work, but the data showed we were working. It was working about 1 out of every 10 times before. If we get to 3 out of 10, that's a pretty good success rate. We're hoping in a year to have some data. We're hoping in a year to have a second parole pilot set up with another tribe. I understand understand, all of you that might have some doubt about whether or not that can work. We've had our doubts, but we have a good partner in Siston Wahpeton, and they're trying very hard to make this work. Increased treatment dollars in number 3. Through this process, South Dakota made the largest investment in state history in treatment. And for the first time ever, it's evidence-based treatment. We say evidence-based a lot because we've been doing this for a couple of years now. What does that mean? The statute defines it as a treatment or a program or a policy that is scientifically proven to reduce recidivism. That's in the statute. There are policies that are evidence-based around the country. That's what we tried to adopt. And the new SABISA, do you remember what SABISA stands for? It's an evidence-based treatment program that all the providers in South Dakota that are providing for the court system or for DOC have been trained on, and they're using it with class 5 and 6 felony individuals. So mostly our drug and alcohol folks that were the nonviolent folks filling our prisons. They're using this new evidence-based programming. We don't have the data yet to see what the outcomes are in South Dakota, but that's the purpose of this oversight council. That's a 3-branch council, has a prosecutor, also a defense attorney on it, and we'll be tracking that data over the course of the next couple of years, just like with the Hope Courts, trying to figure out, does this work in Selby? Because if it does, we want to go back to the legislature and expand this so all of our rural attorneys and the rural judges and the defendants have this as a potential option to be held more accountable in their community. Should we go to the next slide? Yeah, we've kind of talked about it. This is an example of the graduated sanctioning grid at UJS.
So here's the grid and the way it works. As part of this, there's evidence-based rule that came out from the Supreme Court. It mandated a couple things. Every felony probationer has to have an LSIR, which provides a score based on their risk level. And so then that risk level is used to go across the top of the grid. This is a little hard to see. But you go across the top, high, medium, low. We've identified, and we had a large group of people that just kind of came up with, in general, here's what you can do wrong on probation. And that's kind of the list. We categorize them minor, moderate, and serious. Everything highlighted in yellow, if you engage in that conduct, no matter what the response is, you lose your earned discharge credit that month. And so this is really meant to be a menu for the court service officer. Before Senate Bill 70, a CSO, when there was a violation, very hesitant to just decide what should be done with that person. They would either email the judge, file a petition to revoke, and just say, you guys figure it out. Senate Bill 70 really vested a lot of authority in that court service officer because, as Jim mentioned, if you're going to respond now to the violation, you have to have the authority to respond now to the violation. You can't schedule a hearing and get it done. And so a CSO, so continued missed meeting. You miss 3 more meetings with the CSO that month, you're not going to get your discharge credit. The CSO can take action based on what it is. The highest action a CSO can take is 48-hour jail stay. And that's built into the menu. That, to my knowledge, has not been used yet as a sanction. That's pretty rare. The CSO has always had that authority existing in statute, but it's not used very often. It may start to be used more. We'll see. We're keeping very close tabs on this. But really, there's just
let's do an eye test here just to see if anybody needs glasses. Those guys are trying to make a living too. Can everybody read that? Mm-hmm. Still. I think UJS made this so small.
Yeah, you don't want to read it.
It's like a Supreme Court read.
Yeah. So this really provides that menu of options for that CSO. They can deviate up or down, but they have to have the chief court service officer provide approval. And when you think about this, kind of in the background of all this, Jim mentioned the large number of revocations of Native Americans. There was a lot of discussion about why does that exist? Is it because there's too much discretion and it's being used inappropriately? Is it because of cultural sensitivity issues? Why is it? Well, you know, so we tried to build in anything we can to kind of standardize things and standardize responses, so it's not just, I like this person better, or if it's an impermissible reason, you know, for some reason on this person's docket, Native Americans are the only one where there's a petition to revoke being filed. Well, that would raise a red flag, I think. And so now when you have a court service officer responding, if they're trying to go up or down in the grid, that chief CSO sees why they're doing it, and they're going to start seeing which probationers they're doing it for. And if there is a trend like that, we're going to pick up on it pretty quickly, I think, I hope. And so we're just trying to really build a lot of guidance in. And you know, when we have that data, we have the results of how the sanctions are working, I think we're going to start seeing. This is all intended to get their attention. It should be called the sanctions and incentive grid. We in the court system are really good at doing sanctions. We're not so hot with incentives. And so the best incentive we have is the earned discharge credit, and taking that away, and more importantly, awarding it. When it's awarded, your client, if they're on probation, will get a letter from their CSO saying, you know, you earned your credit this month, congratulations, which